Is this low-hanging fruit material? This might be low-hanging fruit material. We're gonna do it anyway and see how this goes. Okay. In this video, I'm going to argue that the Catholic understanding of the afterlife is actually incoherent. Part 1. Pertinent Teachings. In the Catechism, Part 1, Section 2, Chapter 3, Article 12, named I Believe in Life Everlasting, the first paragraph, p. 1020, states, "The Christian who unites his own death to that of Jesus views it as a step towards him and an entrance into everlasting life." P. 1022 speaks of eternal retribution and of everlasting damnation with regards to hell. P. 1023 states that souls in heaven will live forever with Christ. Links to the catechism down below. From these lines, though, it should be clear and frankly non-controversial that Catholics and the Catholic Church teach and believe that the afterlife for humans is eternal or everlasting, regardless of what the ultimate destination for any particular soul might be: heaven, hell, purgatory, limbo, somewhere else. No human soul will ever cease to exist, according to the Catholic Church. The Catholic Church also teaches that there is free will in heaven. In the below link, Father Saunders, writing for the Catholic Education Resource Center, states definitively that, quote, "we retain our free will in heaven." Father Saunders backs up this claim by quoting the Catechism, p. 1730, the Epistles, 1 Corinthians 13:12, Augustine's Confessions, and Aquinas' Summa. I will not recreate Father Saunders' entire argument here, since I believe that the claim that free will exists in heaven is mostly non-controversial among Catholic thinkers, but I will leave the original article by Father Saunders linked down below. Though the existence of free will in heaven is critical to my argument, and I will revisit this in the potential defeaters section of this video. Further, the Church makes it clear that there can be no movement of souls between heaven and hell. That is to say, no soul that ever enters heaven will ever enter hell, and no soul that ever enters hell can ever enter heaven. This should also be non-controversial, but line 1035 in the Catechism backs up my assertion here, in which the Catechism states that hell is eternal separation from God. If it's eternal separation, then you're never entering heaven. Compare this to line 1025, which states that to be in heaven is to be with Christ, so separation means no crossover. Eternal separation means no crossover. I will again reintroduce this point in the potential defeater section later in this video. One last pertinent teaching of the Church is that the morality of a human act is determined by intention. That's from p. 1750, as well as upon the object and the circumstances. That is to say that it would be a sin to try to murder an innocent person, even if you wound up being unable to murder that innocent person. The intention to murder by itself is a sin, regardless of whether or not a murder actually occurs. Again, this should be non-controversial, but this is critical to my argument. Part 2, the problem. In this video, I'm going to argue that the following three teachings cannot exist all together at the same time. Number 1, that the afterlife is eternal. Number 2, that there is free will for at least one soul in the afterlife. And number 3, that there is no movement between the souls in heaven and hell. Perhaps the most pivotal point in this whole post will be what I mean when I say free will. What does free will entail? I'm going to insist on the following claim. If I have free will, then it is possible for me to try to do anything. Note here that I am not saying that if I have free will, I can do anything, only that I can try to do anything. For example, Catholics would not deny that Catholics have free will simply because they cannot run at 100 miles per hour. Catholics would say that they do have free will. You have the free will to try to run at 100 miles per hour. I think that my statement that free will entails that I can try to do anything should be non-controversial, but again, this is pivotal to my argument. So if Catholics don't think that free will entails that one can try to do anything, then I might need to reconsider this argument. Okay. So given that free will means it's possible for somebody to try to do anything, and that trying to sin is a sin already, that means that free will makes sin possible. Possible. Free will makes sin possible. It doesn't guarantee sin, but it makes it possible. Again, this should be non-controversial. Here's a syllogism in case you want to try to pick apart this portion of the video. Syllogism 1, premise 1, free will entails that a person can try to do anything. Premise 2, sinning falls under the category of anything. Conclusion. Therefore, free will entails that a person can try to sin. Premise 3. Premise 3. Free will entails that a person can try to sin. See the conclusion. Premise 4. Trying to sin is a sin. See Catechism of the Catholic Church, p. 1750. Conclusion 2. Therefore, free will entails that a person can sin. Now, the possibility of sinning simply means that the probability of sinning is non-zero over some unit of time. So, given that free will exists in heaven, that means that it is possible to sin in heaven. Now, a Catholic is free to state that it is exceedingly unlikely for a person to sin in heaven, given the presence of God and the beatific vision and all of that. But the Catholic must state that it is possible to sin in heaven, or else the Catholic must reject that free will exists in heaven. I will readdress the Catholic who wants to deny that free will exists in heaven in the potential defeaters section, but for the next little bit, let us work with the idea that there is free will in heaven and therefore sin is possible, even if exceedingly unlikely in heaven. Since heaven is eternal, we can divide the amount of time into any kind of segment, and there will be infinitely many of those segments. As in, there are an infinite number of seconds in heaven, and there's an infinite number of minutes, an infinite number of hours, years, decades. You get the point. So let's say that the possibility of sinning in heaven is exceedingly small. Maybe 1 in every 100 million years. The chances of sinning in heaven will still asymptotically approach 100% over time. As long as something is possible, given an eternity, that thing will happen. That is a mathematical certainty. And so, since we have an eternal afterlife with free will and no movement of people between heaven and hell, we wind up with a heaven full of people who will continue to sin as time stretches into eternity. This seems internally inconsistent, and this is the heart of this video. From here, I'm going to delve into some potential defeaters. Potential defeater number 1, any one of my 3 points isn't true. So, 1A, imagine some heaven without free will. Now, the problem disappears entirely. Nobody will sin in heaven because it is not possible to do so. That defeats my entire video. 1B, imagine a heaven which isn't eternal. Maybe heaven is only 100 to the 100 years long, and maybe the chances of sinning are something like 1 sin in every 1,000 to 1,000 years or something. So now the chances of sinning are actually still virtually 0, even though there is free will in heaven. So again, problem solved. 1C, imagine an afterlife in which there is movement between heaven and hell. Eventually, heaven would empty over time as one by one souls sinned, and all of those souls would be cast into hell. Now, we can also imagine some kind of hell where over time, as long as the souls in hell are also free, they will eventually repent. And if they repent, maybe they're sent to heaven. So maybe the afterlife is actually full of souls in heaven going to hell and souls in hell going to heaven. And there's just this bouncing back and forth for all of eternity. that would also defeat my entire argument that it's inconsistent. But again, that requires some serious revision to standard Catholic teaching. Here's a probably more palatable potential defeater for the Catholics in my audience. So potential defeater number 2, free will doesn't actually imply that a person can try to do anything. I will admit that I'm not on board here, but I wanted to think out loud. I wanted to struggle out loud about the definition of what is free will and what does it entail. I'm not so sure that I'd be willing to call any system of will as being free if you couldn't even try to do certain things. Certainly, the free will that Catholics talk about on earth is a kind of free will where we can try to do anything. I don't think that any Catholic would disagree that we can try to do anything. So let's say that in heaven, the kind of free will that we have in heaven does not entail that you can try to do anything. If that's the case, then we're using the same word, free will, to describe the system of will on earth and the system of will as it is in heaven, but they're really not identical, even though we're using identical words. So we should probably come up with like 2 different words. Like we should probably call it like, I don't know, like earthly free will and like heavenly free will. And like earthly free will is actually freer than the heavenly free will. I don't know. We would need to come up with something here though, if we were going to try to differentiate the free will in heaven versus the free will on earth. Again, just kind of trying to think of actual defeaters to my argument. And how about this one? Potential defeater number 3. The eternity of heaven isn't an actual infinite, it's a potential infinite. And so the chances of sinning will never hit 100%. I actually posed this question to Braxton from Trinity Radio, and his response, Braxton's response to my exact question was exactly this, that heaven is not an actual infinite. Heaven is a potential infinite, and we can just constantly define the probability of sinning in heaven is just always going to be like, you know, some factor above whatever the current actual time elapsed is. Now, I'm not sure exactly how we have like a changing probability of sin in heaven. Like that doesn't seem to quite be the same definition of free will either as the free will that everybody seems to agree that we have on earth. But regardless, I really liked this this idea of heaven as not being an actual infinite. It's just a potential infinite. And so like the probability will again, I don't know exactly how it works, but I like the reasoning here. And then how about this one? Potential defeater number 4. There's actually no time in heaven at all. So I've actually heard different Christians say this. So they'll say something to the effect of, heaven isn't infinite in the sense that there are infinite years in heaven, but rather heaven is like a snapshot or a moment frozen in time. If that's the case, then I think that there is no free will in heaven. So this is kind of similar to potential defeater number 2. And this understanding of the afterlife would also open up a whole new can of worms. If there's no time in heaven, then there is no change in heaven. The angels in Genesis rebelled, and rebelling is change. Rebelling requires time. So there was time in heaven. Maybe God froze time in heaven after the angels rebelled or something like that. This seems to open up like a whole new can of worms, but I did think that it was worth bringing up as a potential defeater to my argument. Okay, that should be enough for now. I'm looking forward to this discussion in the comments down below, and hopefully some people make some rebuttals to this argument. I've laid out a few, but there's no way that I've captured all of them. And again, I feel like this is low-hanging fruit. Maybe it is, maybe it's not. There's only one way to find out, and that's if Kyle Whittington responds to this video. So thanks for watching, everybody, and I really look forward to the conversation down below. Thanks.